Is the US-Saudi relationship changing? Obama's recent meeting with King Salman in Riyadh started tense talks with the Saudis and Washington's other Persian Gulf allies. Now, it's claimed US-Saudi ties have worsened since Saudi King Salman took the throne, promoting radical elements into his cabinet. Observers say King Salman didn't show Obama due respect by dispatching the governor of Riyadh to greet the president at the airport rather than going himself. It's said Saudis doubt Obama's commitments to their security. In turn, while describing the Saudis as the US's so-called allies, Obama has complained their policies fuel anti-US terror and regional chaos. Talks in Riyadh, set to involve the leaders from Bahrain, Oman, Qatar and the United Arab Emirates, are believed to be Washington's effort to convince its Arab allies to step up contributions to targeting ISIL in Syria and Iraq. Yet Saudi Arabia is still the largest buyer of US military hardware. Arms sales have even increased under Obama, with more than $100 billion approved in 2015 alone. Is Saudi Arabia losing its influence on the US? How important is Saudi oil to America? And how will Washington's new relationship with Tehran affect its old relationship with Riyadh? These are the simple questions we sought to answer. Obama met King Salman of Saudi Arabia and held 2 days of tense talks. Is being an ally to the most autocratic regime in the world devastating the US's global image as a leader in democracy? We asked the American public.
I don't know. Sorry.
That is a good question and one I am not going to answer.
I'm not sure. There's no proof of that.
It's very dangerous for America to get involved in such issues. There are a lot of issues in the Middle East where, by taking sides with Saudi Arabia, it contravenes what America is saying in other aspects of their foreign policy.
No, I think that dialogue is paramount with every country in the world, and regardless of any differences that might or might not be. I mean, take a look at President Obama's recent connection with Cuba, for example. Because I think that diplomacy is about engaging.
No, it's definitely not. It's just showing us as a nation that we're just developing even more, and we're being more diverse in who we allow in and who we control. Not control for lack of better words, but who we just embellish with our population, our laws, and our passes and things of that nature. So I think that it's an amazing job what he's doing as far as incorporating the Muslim culture into American.
Well, I don't know a great deal about it, but the quote from the film comes to mind. Keep your friends close, your enemies closer.
I'm not sure.
I think so. I wish it was dissolved.
I think it is. I think it shouldn't be. I don't think Saudi Arabia should be that important in U.S. policy to justify the kinds of military support and ignoring of human rights that goes into those policies.
What effect is America's friendship with Saudi Arabia having on the US's international standing as an advocate for democracy? We asked our experts.
In terms of the United States viewing itself as a leader of democracy, it has huge problems internally with political corruption, with corporations and special interest groups effectively buying and paying for election results. And in terms of it being a contradiction, its relationship with Saudi Arabia being a contradiction toward its, sort of being a leader of democracy. Historically speaking, that's never been a problem for the United States. If you look at its relationship with Cuba, pre-revolution, it was never a problem when Batista was running the country. Post-revolution, human rights became an issue, and all of these types of things associated with sort of Soviet-style communism. If you look at Chile, for example, in 1974, there was a coup instigated effectively by the United States, and that was to overthrow a democratically elected government and install a very much undemocratic government. The same thing with Mossadegh in Iran. they overthrew him. So really the history of the United States doesn't speak of one that cares much for democracy in other countries, and so there's no real contradiction in terms of its own actions. Its position as leader of the democratic world is really a self-entitled one, and really represents it just being the most powerful democratic country as opposed to a leader of democracy.
This particular trip is actually sort of exposes the relationship between United States and Saudi Arabia. United States as the masters and Saudis as followers, and the fact that the relationship has broken down has got many reasons. One of the reasons is that the Saudi Arabia has not been able to deliver what the United States wants in Syria, in Iraq, in Afghanistan. As a matter of fact, now there is a very strong movement within the United States, which actually people are questioning the Saudis' involvement in 9/11. And this has nothing to do with a sort of lack of relationship between this particular administration and Saudi Arabia. It goes far beyond that, and it will continue.
King Salman didn't greet Obama personally at the airport. Instead of a senior level royal shaking hands with the president, it was merely a governor. Do the public feel these diplomatic gestures of apparent disrespect show Saudi Arabia is frustrated at losing its traditional influence on the US?
Not necessarily.
Probably, but you know, politics is really hard for the average person to understand. A lot of messages are sent through different ways, and that's probably one of them. That there has clearly been unhappiness that I've read about on the part of Saudi Arabia with respect to the U.S. and perhaps the other direction as well.
That I am not sure.
Yes, definitely.
I think that's up to the Saudi Arabian government to tell the Department of State, but think about it. Raul Castro didn't greet President Obama down in Cuba either. And that didn't mean that his trip to Havana was a failure. On the contrary.
Definitely shows a lack of disrespect and lack of traditions. It does, but on the grand scheme of things, I think that's something small, something so small that, you know, we can still bypass in working with the culture of Saudi Arabia.
I can't really comment on that because I don't know enough about it, I'm sorry.
Yes, I think it's an insult. And I don't know how Obama reacted, but I guess all that you can do is be graceful under the circumstances.
Sure, yeah, if we're taking it just based on the surface, then yes.
What can our experts tell us about the symbolism contained in sending a relatively low-level governor to welcome the American president instead of sending a royal?
So I think that when world leaders make these kind of statements, they are, at the end of the day, gestures. The Saudis are still very much sort of reliant on the US's economic power, etc., etc. But it is a public display of the frustration, as you say, that the Saudis feel toward the United States. And really they're using it as a bargaining chip, something that they can bring to the table and throw the United States off of its prime game, if you like.
I think when we trying to analyze the relationship with the United States and Saudi Arabia, it really very clearly is master and slave relationship. And you know, United States have always sort of told the Saudis what to do. And the Saudis have not been able to actually do it properly either. And, you know, but why the King Salman didn't go himself to see Obama? Some people are sort of reading into it that it was the anger of the king with the administration of Obama. But in reality, I think the real thing is that he is becoming very elderly. He is not in a very good health. And even when you looked at him in Turkey, you could see that he is not physically that able, and that could be the reason. But the reality is that I think we should not really try to read any sort of thing that indicates Saudi Arabia has got a real say in this relationship.
Obama has admitted Saudi policies fuel anti-US terror and regional chaos. Has the US lost its appetite for Saudi oil? Is Saudi oil no longer worth defending with military adventures? Here's what the public thought.
I think it seems like America is interested at this point in trying to foster its own resources.
It's no longer worth defending. I mean, they've opened other ventures with Iran, and so it's not as important to have the same relationships with them anymore.
I don't have a comment on that. I don't know.
That I do not know an answer to either.
You know what? I think for that, you have to see how the market is behaving right now. Oil is coming down, and there's a push for alternative energies. Even the Saudi government is going to start selling 5% of Aramco, and they're going to start trying to do a sovereign fund. I think it's just about diversification of the market. I think the days of using oil as a geopolitical tool are over, way over.
That question varies to me. I think it's a taboo between both. So that's how I'm just going to leave that question, because it's a taboo. I feel like, it's one playing on the other to a greatest extent.
I just don't know enough about these things to answer these questions, I'm sorry.
I think the military adventures have had a lot of disastrous effects, like the military hardware is being used more against Yemen than being used to actually help settle things in places where there's enough chaos to cause problems in the world. And it shouldn't be that way.
Probably we don't need to use their oil that much.
Has there been a decline in America's interest in Saudi oil on account of Saudi's provocative policies in the region? We discussed the matter with our experts.
I think in terms of Saudi Arabian oil, the US production of shale oil, for example, has been one of the reasons why the global oil prices crashed. It's not just the United States, it's other countries that are producing shale oil as well. But this comes at the detriment to countries like Saudi Arabia, who have the largest stock of oil in the world. So the United States is less dependent itself on Saudi Arabia for its energy resources. And so it makes sense that they would be less inclined to be so kind toward the Saudis.
Saudi Arabia serves a purpose, and currently what is serving is to bring the price of oil down, to put pressure on Russia and Iran and elsewhere, and is actually serving that purpose. But within that concept, we are seeing quite a new awakening in the United States beyond the present administration of Obama, that people are actually questioning that to what extent Saudi Arabia was involved in 9/11, which has never been addressed, to what extent Bush actually hid this, to what extent this is actually a partner which is causing quite a lot of harm to United States, and for how long a United States could carry a partner like the Saudis and other Gulf states. And I think that is becoming more apparent, and I think in the future we're going to see the sort of much more sort of separation. And then on top of everything, there is this whole concept that United States wants to be more interested in Far East than Middle East. There is nothing more that could be done in the Middle East, and they see the future of their interests and preserving their interests is going further into the east by China Sea and etc.
US arms sales to Saudi Arabia have increased under Obama, with more than $100 billion approved in 2015 alone. We asked the public, does the US really want to contain the Saudis and their funding, support and promotion of extremism across the world?
I guess so. I don't know why they're selling them so much. I don't think they need it all.
By supplying so much arms to that area, it's coming back to have more hassles for the United States. I think there is a level where they can see that. They want to have cooperative arrangements. It's in their best interest to do that. But by becoming too supportive, or by devoting too many resources to Saudi Arabia, by providing too much there, they create certainly the chance of more conflict with nations like Iran, where issues are getting between different countries there. By providing arms on one side, it's not helping America's major aims.
I don't personally believe so, and I feel like that's something that should be identified. Definitely should be identified.
Well, I certainly wouldn't, but I don't speak for the whole U.S., but I don't think it's right at all.
Well, I certainly hope that they don't, and Obama's need to spend money on arms for Saudi Arabia was perhaps necessary by the politics of the time, but I think those politics are changing, and I would certainly hope that military aid to the Saudis would diminish rather rapidly.
With the increase in American arms sales to Saudi Arabia, we invited our experts to explore the extent to which America is genuinely interested in limiting Saudi Arabia's involvement with global extremism.
Well, I think if you look at the situation in Syria, ISIS is one of the major contributors is Saudi Arabia, and a lot of those guns have come via Saudi Arabia from the United States. So really, when you have a broader analysis of what's going on in Syria, the sort of development of ISIS as being this major problem inside the country has been to the benefit of the United States. Effectively, the US's policy was the removal of Assad, and they used ISIS in order to get that, and then more than likely would have gone in and had ground troops in Syria had it been successful. It looks like it won't be. So really the United States doesn't have any interest necessarily. It's not a primary objective of the United States foreign policy to see to see Saudi Arabia cease funding and fueling these terrorist and extremist organizations, because it has been so beneficial to US foreign policy.
The fact that Saudi Arabia is buying arms from the United States is nothing new. The fact of the matter is almost like sort of paying back for services and the support that the United States provides. But now the Saudi Arabia, unlike before, would just pile up these weapons, are actually misusing it, are committing war crimes, are in Yemen, and is financing and providing these weapons to Takfiri terrorists of Daesh and al-Nusra and others. So really it's becoming much more problematic for the United States, and indeed for Britain as well. The fact is this, that both the United States and Britain could be held accountable under international law for aiding and abetting war crimes. So these are actually changing the thing. I think to some extent we need to sort of look at United States is like a sort of slave that is going out of control and wants to sort of expand his wing and is creating problems. And United States is reassessing is actually how valuable is Saudi Arabia and how damaging is Saudi Arabia.
Is the US's new relationship with Iran an instrument to encourage the Saudis to reconsider their religious doctrine? Is the public's opinion.
Well, I hope not. I hope the agreement's about creating world peace, and I think world peace is important for everyone, including Americans. But certainly the Middle East has been faced with challenges for many decades, and I think creating world peace is always important. So I think that's the intent behind the agreements.
I would hope not.
I would say no.
I'm unsure.
We asked our experts if they felt developments between America and Iran might be used to drive a Saudi rethink over its religious doctrine.
Well, I think as the United States has become less and less dependent on a strong relationship with Saudi Arabia in terms of its oil. It doesn't need to bend to the Saudis in terms of who it should and shouldn't be friends with in the region. And also, the Iranians are a very good partner in terms of their battle against ISIS. They help create that sort of buffer zone of potentially ISIS spreading. So I really don't see the relationship with Iran as being necessarily a major influence on Saudi policy, but it is certainly a way to put pressure on the Saudis more generally.
I personally don't believe that there is any new relationship between Iran and United States. What happened in reality was United States coming to the conclusion that the sanctions that they put was for the reason of two reasons. One was curtail the Iranian know-how in nuclear technology, and second was to actually stop them from building their own sophisticated weapons. And unfortunately, on both of these accounts, the whole thing escalated at the time of sanction, and sanctions were pointless. And so therefore, they came to the conclusion that, look, this is not the way to do it. Let us actually stop the sanction and find other ways of moving forward, because it's hurting them and it's hurting the international community, and it's pointless. If anything, it's counterproductive. So that was the reason of this sort of negotiation. But as regards Saudi Arabia is reading it differently, and I think there are some elements within United States who are actually turning around and trying to get more out of Saudis than they already got, and they're using Iran. They're saying, if you don't give us more, we are going to actually be more friendly towards Iran, and scaring them to actually serve them even more so and more obediently than they have done in past.
US-Saudi relations have become strained, mainly because of the Iran nuclear agreement, Saudi aggression in Yemen, and the militaristic foreign policy of King Salman's regime. Yet despite these differences, Saudi Arabia is still the largest buyer of US military hardware, and the US still supports the Saudi-led war in Yemen, which has left nearly 10,000 people dead, including 4,000 women and children. These many contradictions mean that before America chooses who it backs, it has to decide what it wants.